In the summer of 1521, Lake Texcoco had become a siege. The causeways that for centuries had connected Tenochtitlan to the mainland were blocked. The canoes crossing the water no longer carried corn, cloth, or pottery. They carried the wounded, or they never arrived at all. The largest city on the American continent, built on water as if daring geography itself, was being strangled from its own roads. But Tenochtitlan did not fall because it was weak. It fell because its strength had also created enemies, dependencies, and fractures that others knew exactly how to exploit at the right moment. To understand what happened, you have to go back before the fall, before the warships, before the smallpox, before Hernán Cortés had even spoken the name of the city. Tenochtitlan, in 1519, was one of the largest cities in the world. Its population far exceeded that of Madrid, London, or Lisbon. It had been built on an island in the middle of the lake, connected to the mainland by 3 great causeways that could be opened or cut off depending on military or commercial needs. Inside the city there were aqueducts, gardens, palaces, and stepped temples that rose high enough to guide travelers from a distance. The market of Tlatelolco, right next to the city, operated with a scale and regularity that left even Spanish chroniclers speechless. Tens of thousands of people traded goods from across the continent under a system that included specialized judges to settle commercial disputes. This was a city conceived, designed, and governed with a level of complexity that few cultures anywhere in the world could match at that moment. It was also the capital of an empire. Mexica dominance extended over dozens of subjugated peoples through a logic that combined tribute, alliance, and the constant threat of force. The peoples under that rule delivered goods, labor, and sometimes human beings for state rituals. Not all of them accepted this quietly. Some tolerated it because they had no other choice. Others endured it in silence, waiting for a crack in the system. That crack arrived in the form of a Spanish expedition. Hernán Cortés landed on the Gulf Coast in 1519 with just over 500 men, some horses, cannons, and an ambition that his own superiors had not fully authorized. He was an adventurer with legal and political instincts as sharp as his military ones, and he quickly understood something that would change everything in the months ahead. The Mexica Empire was not a solid block. It was a structure with internal fractures, and many of the peoples living under its rule were not allies. They were resentful subjects. Before reaching Tenochtitlan, Cortés passed through Tlaxcala. The Tlaxcalans were a people who had resisted Mexica expansion for decades. They lived in a kind of surrounded enclave, with limited access to trade and under constant threat of Mexica military campaigns. Their first encounter with the Spanish was not friendly. There were battles, genuine resistance. But when Cortés offered an alliance against their common enemy, the Tlaxcalans calculated the situation, and they decided that the Spanish represented an opportunity that would not come again. That alliance was one of the most decisive choices of the entire conflict. Because the war that followed was not a confrontation between Spaniards and indigenous people. It was a Mesoamerican war in which the Spanish were a new actor, technologically different, but numerically small. The tens of thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, along with allies from Texcoco, Huexotzinco, and other peoples who joined over time, shifted the balance of power in ways that no number of firearms could have achieved alone. While Cortés advanced into the interior, the situation inside Tenochtitlan was tense and confused. Moctezuma II ruled a city at the height of its material power, yet he was under pressure from multiple directions. Reports about the strangers were contradictory. The omens circulating through the city were unsettling, and the usual political tools available to him, including negotiation, espionage, and shows of force, did not translate cleanly to something as difficult to classify as this expedition. Moctezuma received Cortés inside the city. The exact reasons remain debated. Whether it was a tactic to buy time, the result of a specific religious interpretation, or a miscalculation of the threat, is still unclear. What became evident was that the coexistence inside the city was unstable from the start, and that real control of the situation gradually slipped toward the newcomers. When Moctezuma died, under circumstances that different sources describe in contradictory ways, the balance had already broken. What followed was the retreat known as La Noche Triste, the sorrowful night, when the Spanish were driven out of the city under Mexica pressure, suffering enormous losses among both the conquistadors and their allies. It was a significant military failure. But Cortés did not abandon the territory. He reorganized in Tlaxcala, reinforced his alliances, received additional men and supplies arriving from Cuba and the Caribbean, and planned a very different return. That plan included something that fundamentally changed the nature of the war: the construction of warships large enough to dominate the lake. If Tenochtitlan depended on the water for its supply lines and communication, controlling the water meant controlling the fate of the city. The ships were built on land, transported in pieces, and assembled at the lakeshore before the final siege. It was a logistical operation of remarkable complexity, carried out with the help of thousands of indigenous allies who hauled the components across the mountains. The siege began in 1521. The causeways were taken section by section. Mexica canoes faced the warships on the lake and gradually lost control of the water. The city, which normally received food, fresh water, and materials from the mainland, became completely cut off. And in that isolation, something arrived that wore no armor and carried no firearms: smallpox. The epidemic had come before the siege. A sick Spanish soldier had unknowingly introduced it, and it spread through a population with no immune defense against it. People died in numbers that even the chronicles of the time described with horror. Among the dead was Cuauhtémoc, Moctezuma's successor, who survived only a few months before he, too, was taken. Smallpox did not choose sides. It killed Mexica fighters, it killed allied warriors, it killed whoever it could reach. But inside a besieged city, with no way to disperse, no medical resources, and no means of isolating the sick, the impact was catastrophic. The number of warriors available to defend the causeways, the temples, and the neighborhoods dropped week by week. The last Mexica ruler was Cuauhtémoc, a nephew of Moctezuma, chosen to lead the resistance at a moment when all signs pointed to the fact that resistance could not last much longer. He held on for weeks of urban combat, street by street, in a city that was being destroyed as it was fought over. The Spanish and their allies demolished buildings to deny them as fortresses, cut off supplies, and advanced methodically. Inside the city there was hunger, untreated sick, and bodies that could not be buried. People drank the salt water of the lake because the aqueduct had been severed. Cuauhtémoc tried to escape by canoe on August 13, 1521. He was intercepted on the lake by a Spanish vessel and captured without armed resistance. He was around 25 years old. He was brought before Cortés, who treated him with a formal courtesy that did not prevent him from later having Cuauhtémoc tortured in an attempt to find the Mexica treasure, and eventually ordering his execution in 1525 during an expedition to Honduras on charges of treason. The final resistance had a name, an age, and an ending that was neither heroic nor quiet. On the ruins of Tenochtitlan, another city began to rise. Temples were torn down and their stones repurposed to build colonial churches and palaces. Over the following centuries, the lake was gradually drained by an administration that did not understand or did not care to understand how the pre-Hispanic water system worked. What had been a city on water became a city on mud, prone to flooding, to sinking, to the kind of structural instability that still shapes the architecture and geology of Mexico City today. Tenochtitlan did not entirely disappear. It stayed underneath, in the foundations of the cathedral, in the repurposed stones of colonial walls, in the layout of certain streets that still follow the logic of the old causeways. It stayed in the language, in the name of the city, in the place names of neighborhoods that still carry the memory of an earlier order. And it remained in a question that has never fully closed. What kind of world might a city like that have built? Had its own imperial weight not created the fractures that made it vulnerable? Because that is what the fall of Tenochtitlan reveals, more than any battle or any single name. Empires do not fall only from the outside. They fall from within, through the tensions they generated, through the peoples they ruled without ever winning over, through the loyalties they never managed to build. And on the ruins of what falls, something new always begins to rise, bearing the marks of what it destroyed, even when it would rather not acknowledge them.